Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and the huge NHS scandal involving former Prime Minister David Cameron took on another interesting turn this week as Boris Johnson has ordered what he's calling an independent inquiry. Apparently not minding one little bit if he trashes his former friend's reputation, and Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, who has enabled the corrupt Tory contracts over the past year, has rushed to try and absolve himself of blame as well. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So first of all, for regular viewers who may have wondered why there was only one video yesterday, it's not because there was a lack of news, but more a catastrophic failure of internet. Solutions have been put in place, but that was that. Now, trying to catch up a little bit this weekend as best I can until more robust alternative solutions are in place. But on to politics. And when I first talked about this scandal, I think it was a bit under a week ago, I really didn't see how it was fundamentally different on the corruption scale to the vast sums of money wasted by Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak on ensuring that they continue to attract large donations for the party in the future. But although I still don't see any difference in terms of corruption, in terms of impacts, it's about to be. Now, Boris Johnson, who has famously blocked inquiries into all aspects of government, anything at all of public interest, he's sat on reports that have been written, to stop them being published. He's even rewritten independent inquiry into racism in the UK to make it look like there isn't any. And he's now ordered a full independent inquiry into the David Cameron-Lex Greensill contract scandal. Now, I gather that Boris Johnson will not mind in the slightest if David Cameron comes out of this looking rather silly and a little bit corrupt. I also had a comment from a viewer suggesting that he could use it to beat Rishi Sunak down a bit as well, which is an interesting thought. After all, as I've said before, I think one of the factors keeping Boris Johnson in place as Conservative leader and therefore Prime Minister is that there isn't an obvious replacement. Rishi Sunak comes closest, with Michael Gove maybe a possible dark horse. So anything that tarnishes Sunak's star in the party will be welcome for a Prime Minister who, let's face fact, obtained the throne himself with backstabbing and will be very conscious of the possibility of suffering the same fate. But I don't think the inquiry will focus on the action of ministers, which is crazy, of course. After all, it really doesn't matter what either David Cameron or Lex Greensill did. They had no power whatsoever to misappropriate public funds. No access to the public coffers at all. That public money had to be given to them by ministers of the Crown. That means Boris Johnson, Matt Hancock and Rishi Sunak. Now, if Cameron and Greensill obtained the contract under false pretences, that might be a bit different. If those ministers had acted entirely appropriately and with the best interests of the public and were just victims of a con, sure, okay. But that's not what's going on here. Hancock was visibly uncomfortable when answering questions from his opposite number in Labour, Jonathan Ashworth, about his role in the process. About the private drinks he'd had to discuss the matter without any officials present and without any records made of the discussion. Then there's the Chancellor himself, Rishi Sunak. He's trying to say that it was nothing to do with him or his department. You what, mate? £400 million of government money, and it had nothing to do with the Treasury? It gave Shadow Chancellor Annalise Dodds an easy retort. First Chancellor in history to claim that he didn't know what was happening with hundreds of millions of pounds worth of public money. It is, of course, absolute nonsense. But the fact that Sunak is trying to deny all knowledge is because he appreciates just how serious this situation is. The reason the position of Chancellor is so powerful, second only to the Prime Minister, is that they control the purse strings. Every other minister that wants to achieve anything needs the funds to do it. And the person who decides whether they'll get that money or not is the Chancellor. Besides, the very scheme that Cameron and Greensill wanted to use was personally backed by Sunak. There's even a letter written by another cabinet minister, Alex Sharma, on the government's own website, naming the Chancellor personally as authorising the scheme last April. So even if you were prepared to believe that such a vast sum of money could ever bounce around government without the Treasury's knowledge or involvement, The evidence on the government's website removes any last doubt. But like I say, the inquiry is surely not going to focus in on the actions of ministers. Remember that an independent inquiry doesn't mean an effective inquiry. People read too much into the term independent. It's like independent media. You'll see some media call themselves independent media. I suppose the independent especially do. A meaningless statement. All media are controlled by people who may or may not have a political agenda to push. Some of them may wish to engage in genuine journalism. Some of them want to push an idea. But whether they do or don't has got nothing to do with being independent. They're all independent of some people and controlled by other people. So an independent inquiry simply means that the person or people in charge of that inquiry won't have ministers breathing down their neck every day. But ministers still set the guidelines. They also appoint the people running it. Like Boris Johnson set up an independent inquiry to find out, if there was racism in the country or to what level of racism. What happened? He put someone in charge who really didn't believe in racism, didn't think it was a thing, and then still rewrote it. But I'll come on to that. Let us just imagine, for the sake of argument, Boris Johnson wanted to set up another independent inquiry. Let's say he wanted to set up an independent inquiry to find out which was the best county in the UK. Let's say he asked me to run it. I think it should come as no surprise that after an awful lot of expensive travel and research on my part, really getting to know what makes each UK county great, that my eventual report would, independently, of course, decide that Yorkshire is in fact the finest county in the UK. Like when you want to make out that the UK isn't racist, like I said in the latest case, you order an independent inquiry, you don't get yourself involved in it, so it's independent, you're not running it, but you put someone in charge who doesn't believe in racism. And even then the government had to rewrite the independent report before publishing it, meaning that although the inquiry was independent, albeit not set up to find any evidence, the report was anything but independent because the government rewrote it themselves. And the same will apply here. There are already mutterings about the close personal links of the lawyer chosen to run the inquiry, Nigel Boardman, because he is closely connected to the scheme that David Cameron and Lex Greensill sought to abuse. Yes, this means that he will have expert knowledge of the system, but also that he has a vested interest in the scheme itself not coming under attack. For Boardman to identify weaknesses in the scheme is to identify weaknesses in his own work, because he was one of the people who was charged with putting the scheme into operation. And if the scheme doesn't come up for serious criticism, then of course ministers will also be shielded from criticism. I know that they're going to be talking to at least Rishi Sunak and presumably others as well, but no harm will befall ministers from this report if the report cannot criticise the scheme itself. This is the way an independent inquiry works in practice. You impose guidelines that will never come back to you, appoint someone who's only too happy that they don't. So the inquiry may prove problematic for David Cameron, which Johnson won't mind at all apparently, but shouldn't bother him directly, nor any of his ministers. So is this just another Johnson stitch-up? Well, that's the intention from his point of view, but also perhaps not so easy to brush off. It might, however, present Labour with a focal point for Tory sleaze. The Conservatives have been quite breathtaking in their audacity here. The level of corruption regarding public spending linked to the pandemic, and sometimes only very tentatively linked to the pandemic, has been so immense that it's hard to get people to focus on it. It's not one big scandal, it's lots of big scandals that just desensitise you because it comes at you thick and fast. Now, this particular issue may be the focus that Labour need because it's now linked to someone who's a big public figure, David Cameron. They may be able to use that to really shine a spotlight on the whole issue. Now, if they can do this, and they're certainly trying, then the restricted nature of the so-called independent inquiry will be less of an issue. If the report is published and exonerates Johnson and his ministers, that itself can be attacked as sleaze. After all, they appointed someone with a vested interest in the corrupt scheme. Back in 1997, when Labour last came to power, Tory sleaze was all over the media. It was a powerful factor in toppling them, and Labour will look to use exactly the same Tory weakness again. To this end, earlier this week, they put forward a motion in Parliament to order a proper inquiry, not an insider stitch-up. It was defeated 357 votes to 262. But of course, the plan here was not to get the inquiry in place. They knew they had no chance. The Conservatives got a massive majority. It was done to ask a question of the Conservatives. Is this scandal down to a few rotten apples who just happen to be Conservatives, but you want nothing to do with them, or is the whole barrel rotten? Now, if it was just a few bad eggs, the Conservative MPs would have voted for the genuinely independent parliamentary inquiry. Doesn't reflect poorly on us. This is just a few people that have been up to no good, and we don't want to associate ourselves with them. However, by voting against it, the Conservatives have implicated themselves and very much associated themselves with the whole thing. Come the next general election, this won't be dodgy Dave Cameron or bent Boris Johnson. It will be good old-fashioned Tory sleaze again. They're all in it because they all voted to conceal it. This will now inevitably form part of Labour's long-term strategy for this Parliament, a slow burner to be poked at every opportunity to show how corrupt the Tories are. Do that, and the Tory lies will lose a lot of their believability, and so goes much of their campaigning power. But those are my thoughts for now. There will inevitably be others as this rumbles on, maybe in a few days, few weeks, months, certainly years. Until then, I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.